Today is April 16th, 2008. We are at Elgin Academy conducting an interview with Mr. Paul Sellers for the Veterans History Project. Mr. Sellers, can you tell me your birth date?
February the 10th, 1922.
Mr. Sellers is present for the interview. Mr. John Fleener is running the camera, and I am conducting the interview, and my name is Sarah Sabo. The Gail, Borden Public Library and Elgin Academy are in partnership working with interviews for the Veterans History Project. Mr. Sellers, can you tell me what war you served in?
World War II.
And what was your branch of service?
I was in the Army.
In the Army. And what was your rank?
Good old PFC.
Can you tell me about a PFC? Where does it fit
That's
into
the
the
bottom.
The bottom.
Well, there's one round below that.
And where did you serve in your time of service?
I served in a month in Fort Benjamin Harrison, and I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, and spent 13 weeks basic training there. And that was under limited service, believe it or not. And the limited service was supposedly doing odd jobs and not combat duty. And then after that, which was a very hard basic training, in fact, at the end of the training, all the officers and the non-coms were busted because of graft and corruption in the barracks and so forth. It was terrible.
And what year would have this been?
In 1943. And then I became part of an officer's mess, which I took care of the mess hall for the officers. And I did that for many months, and I got tired of it. I said, can I get out of this and get in the regular Army? Well, we can send you to another basic training, which was another 13 weeks. So I took another 13 weeks and became a troop clerk. And that, believe it or not, was much easier than the first 13 weeks. So after that, I got furloughed, came home, and went to, where did I go to? Camp Campbell, Kentucky. It's now Fort Campbell. And I learned tank training there. And from there I was on a furlough and went to New York City, and from New York City boarded the boat and went to England. In fact, we left on June the 6th, D-Day. We actually left on Invasion Day. We thought we were going straight to France, but this didn't happen. We went to Liverpool, England, and rode a train down to, it was an orphanage in Bristol, England. And I stayed about a month there, and around the 5th or 10th of July, we boarded an LSI and went to France. And this was a pretty choppy trip over the channel. And an LSI is you walk off into the water. They weren't at a dock or anything. So we were up about knee-high into the water, walked up on the beach. Now this is about not quite a month after D-Day. And the first thing I see when I go up over the sand dunes was a piece of a building and a sign that said, Singer Sewing Machine. So here I end up in France, and I see an American sign. So that was what happened at that point.
So what, can you tell me what division and, that whole military organization, what part of it were you in?
Well, at this time, I was just a replacement.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I was waiting to take somebody's position that had been killed or wounded or whatever. And this went on for several months, believe it or not. And the outfit I finally joined was the 3rd Cavalry Group, the 43rd in fact. And this was in France. They finally found out I was a tank crewman, so they put me in a tank as a replacement, but I never found out the man's name that I replaced. So then that's how I joined the 3rd Cavalry Group.
And the 3rd Cavalry is part of what?
The 3rd Cavalry Group, that's part of the 20th Corps, and the 20th Corps is part of the 3rd Army under George Patton.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
Where were you living at the time?
Huntington, Indiana. Dan Quayle's hometown.
And obviously, because you were drafted, you didn't have a choice of what branch of service
Correct.
that you were drafted into.
Correct.
Is that correct? Can you tell me about those first days of service? I know you went through 2 boot camps. Can you tell us a little bit more about that first boot camp experience?
Well, the very first, believe it or not, I have size 13 feet shoes, and they had no shoes to fit me. So for 30 days, I was in a, where they gave you your clothing allowances, and it was my job to stand there and make sure you had 3 pairs of socks and 2 pairs of shorts. And so that was my duty for 30 days. And after that, then I went to basic training. And I had a very easy job when I was cadre of the officers' mess, because I had to make sure everything was lined up and the personnel were there and the place was clean and those things. So I could have set the whole war out right there. And, but being young, I didn't want to do that. So.
But that first boot camp experience or training was one where they discovered a lot of officers were...
They allowed things that they shouldn't. In other words, they sold Class A passes. In other words, you go to town, they would give you a pass if you didn't screw up someplace. And they sold them. And they had gambling in the barracks. They sold alcohol in the barracks. And the biggest blow was when we had mess hall, we all sat down and ate together. And there was a red-headed kid who was sitting, and he had a hair or something in the mashed potatoes, and he made this gesture, and the first sergeant got up, physically picked him up, and threw him out the door. He ate out of his mess kit for weeks. And about 2 weeks before we were through training, a friend of mine, a couple bunks over, had emergency furlough. But he never came back. What so happened, he was an FBI man. And the FBI was the key, plus this red-headed kid were key witnesses to their trial, to these officers in a non-com trial. And that's how they were all busted and sent overseas. So that was not a good induction to the Army, really. The second one was I went to school, and along with the basic training, and that was nice. It was no big deal anymore, shooting over your head with bullets or climbing fences. So I overcame the handicap that I had, and so I was in the regular Army.
So from the time you were drafted until the time you actually left the United States, how many months would that have been?
Well, I was in February of 43, and then I went over in 1944. So I was overseas 13 months, from June till July of 45. So that's what I served in with the 3rd Cavalry Group.
So with that very colorful induction into the Army, can you tell me about some of these instructors? Do you have any interesting stories about these instructors to share? Either the first boot camp experience or the second one.
Well, the first one I like to forget, and it's that they had, I'll give an example of the training. One night I was on guard duty, and they went through the barracks, and my footlocker, they always look at the footlockers, and they said, listen, this is ideal. This is how everybody, it was mine. When they had the real inspection, he kicked it over and said it was a piece of junk. And now this is how you never knew how to react to what they were doing. It was not a good time for 13 weeks. It really wasn't.
Do you think that that's was not typical?
Yeah, I don't think it was typical. No.
How did you get through that? I mean, what did you do to get yourself through those 13 weeks?
I really don't know. You just live with it.
Yeah.
You just live with it. The trouble is you were drafted for the duration, so you didn't know how long. Mm-hmm. You could have been in 3 years or 10 years. No one knew at the time. So the situation was you just didn't know, so you just tried to make the best of it.
So being drafted, it wasn't, I mean, I've always heard of the point system. If you had so many points, you would get out at a certain time. But being drafted, is that not true? Would that have been for enlisted men?
Well,
or
they drew lots or numbers, and when your number come up, you were, so like mine came up, and mine was, I had to go to Indianapolis to an induction center, and of course, I couldn't use my arm, so I was automatically 4F. Well, 4F was good and bad. 4F, you felt like an outcast, but you could get a job anyplace. I don't care where, you could get a job. So it was twofold. And I eventually got better use of my arm while I was in the service, so I was okay. I could function like a normal person.
So you talked about your training in the United States. When you shipped out, then you first went to Liverpool, did you say, or what was your first stop in Great Britain?
We were 4,000 on a boat, on a ship, and I think it was called the America. And at one time it was on a reef or something off of Florida, and they converted it to a troop ship, and there were 4,000 GIs on it, plus the crew, whoever was crewing it. And there was, we were all by ourselves, and you could really, they say, well, you have to move every 8 minutes, and the submarine can't hone in on you that quickly. So every 8 minutes they would change direction. And you actually go to fantail and watch the wake, and you could actually see your wake, and then it would change, and it would change. You could actually follow what it was doing. And we went clear north. Now this is June, and I had our overcoats on. I mean, it was cold. We were way up north. And I tripped over a guy's feet. There was GIs all over the decks, you know. It was sunny, but I tripped over and I turned around, and there was a friend from back home.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
So him and I palled around for the couple of days that was left, and we landed in Liverpool, England. And I said, well, why don't we dock and pull up and get off this thing? And it's just, look over there. Well, the tide must have been 30 feet low. In other words, you could see the white silhouettes on the dock area, and it was too low a tide for the ship to dock. So the next morning, the tide had come in, and I understand now they had 30, 40-foot tidal, or not tidal waves, but what do you call them? The tide comes and goes. Well, they have 30, 40-foot tide.
Yeah.
You know. And we got on the train and went to from Liverpool, rode the train to Bristol, England. And we were in it was an orphanage. And this is the first, they come around lights out. This is, you know, at 10 o'clock at night in the Army, it was lights out at 10 o'clock. And we were out playing baseball yet at 10 o'clock at night. Well, June in northern England is
so
not lights out. And that was my first experience of seeing the latrine and washroom with a huge square, and all the toilet seats ran around all the exterior walls, and that was all into a sewer system that didn't go to the city. It was in the septic system. And the running water would go out of the sink, out, channeled out the floor, outside, and it was just running water outside, and no pipes or anything. That was strange. I was used to outhouses, but not on that level.
Yeah, not that rural or rudimentary.
So that was different. And I got to see my first castle, which was in Nunney, England. And it wasn't too much of a castle, but it was a castle.
So how long would you have stayed in England?
I was only there about 3 weeks at the most.
So you guys stayed in an orphanage. That's where they put you up at while you were in Bristol before they got you on a is it called an LSI to ship out?
Right.
Okay.
It's landing craft infantry. It has steps down the sides.
And
You don't
obviously,
open out.
it can get pretty close to the shore.
Yeah, it was
you guys
close.
could walk
where
out.
we could walk out and walk up. Yeah.
Yeah. But they obviously couldn't bring that type of landing craft in under heavy fire or anything like that.
Well, I think they did.
Could they?
Yeah. A lot of them you see with it open in front for tanks and jeeps and stuff. And there's all different types. The ones that the whole front end drops down. That's what you see mostly in the movies and short reels and stuff. But this happened to be an LSI. And this, they had the Johns on the back of the ship. It was there right into the water. So that was
the sewer system for that.
Another sewer system.
So then you took off from Bristol, and where did you go from there? Bristol to?
I went to, we landed in France.
And that was in Normandy?
Yeah. in
And what beach?
Utah Beach.
Utah Beach.
And we had, see, now I can't talk as a unit because I'm an individual, because I'm a replacement. I don't belong to any organization as such except the U.S. Army. And we were all in the same category, so we were put on, usually traveled by a 6x6, which is a truck, with covered canvas tops. And we were very, very close to the front lines. In fact, there was one time when we had chow, I took my mess kit and I sat down, about from here to that chair was a Bouncing Betsy, which is an anti-personnel mine, which would bounce about this high and then explode.
Would that have been buried, or how
I
would that?
could see it looked not like an umbrella, but the sheath an umbrella before it's covered. It had fingers like that, and if you touched one of those, it bounce up in the air and then explode. And I moved away from there pretty quickly. But that was my first experience of something that could hurt you. And there was zillions of bombers and bombs. I mean, the earth would shake. We were that close. We could feel the vibration. It was that bad. And
so they were still fighting, like, around Cherbourg
well, they
or
only
something?
had a little corner of Cherbourg.
Of that causeway,
oh, yeah.
to win the causeway.
Yeah. It was only, I don't know, 15 miles at the most. Yeah.
And so, as a replacement, you're just traveling with other replacements until somebody snatches you up and says, I need you. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
and so when did you get placed then in your actual, the 3rd Cavalry?
it was about August 10th, somewhere in that vicinity, because the outfit came over. I was actually in France before the outfit landed. And they landed, and they were, I joined them around Thionville or Thionville, France, is where I joined them as a replacement. And from then on, it was constant combat until the end of the war. So I'd say from first part of August till, what was it, 8th of May when the war ended, something like that. Yeah.
So can you give me a snapshot of all the different places you then went with the 3rd Cavalry? Where were they? What battles they fought?
Yes. The Battle of France, of course, towards the end, which is, we were working towards the border between France and Germany, and there was a lot of activity in those areas. We were near Luxembourg quite a few times. In fact, our outfit, the 43rd, did, which they rescued Luxembourg at one time, and then the Battle of Bulge came. Another outfit had to do it again. That was a terrain that was very hilly, and I always say you can't say mountainous until you got to really the Alps, but some of their hills were extremely
Hilly.
high, especially along the Moselle, the Rhine River, and so forth. And when you're driving a tank, some of those hills were very high. In fact, there was a couple of times I thought I'd flip forward or backwards going down a hill. And then it was around Metz. Metz had never been taken by anybody until the 3rd Army and the rest of us helped evacuate that area. And that was a terrible area. Along the Saar River, the Siegfried Line, we finally ended up 50 or 60 miles ahead of any Allied forces when the war ended. So I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. But we spent, like the Battle of Bulge, there are times in these areas I remember more than others because some were rougher than others. Some we would go for days, maybe not fire around, and there'd be days it was very bad. You felt protected being enclosed in steel, but that always brought the heavy stuff out. And 88, if we heard 88, we would sort of hightail it because we didn't stand a chance because our armor would not support anything like that.
And you were on a Chaffee tank, or what kind of a tank were you on?
It was on an M5 to start with because they had produced the M24, as I understand it, probably in April but we didn't get them until we were basically in Germany, around the Saar River, Saar area, and that's when we got our M24s. So we had a little pea shooter, a 37 millimeter, meant nothing. I shot at buildings and it would chip out a chunk and so what, but the 75 would blast into a house, and those homes had walls this thick. Mm-hmm. You know, they were built, and so they were good protection for a lot of places, unless you got the big high explosive stuff, you know. Machine gun fire doesn't mean anything, just mm-hmm. chip away at it.
So how many guns, you would have had one main, like a 75 millimeter gun on that one tank? Or how, would you have
had
others?
Two 30s, a 75, and a 50. And the 130 is set next to the driver. The driver sits on the left, and the assistant driver over here, he has a machine gun. Then the gunner sits here with a 75 and a 30 caliber. Behind him is the tank commander. And over on this side is the loader. And the floor of the tank and the M24s open up, and there's 75 shells, and there's about 50 different varieties of ammunition in the floor of the tank. And then around the outside, inside of the turret, is all the 30 and 50 caliber ammunition. Then you have a trigger and a trigger if you're the gunner. And sometimes you hit the wrong one if you're excited and remember you're traversing the gun would only do about 15 degrees, but it had 360 in circumference. Mm-hmm. And one trigger was for the 30 and one for the 75. Well, if you're anxious, you're looking through a telescope. And the telescope's about this long. Now, it's the only point where a small arms fire, if it was absolutely lined up, could come into the tank. But that odds are not that good. Now, otherwise, you had a periscope looking through it's only about like this, mm-hmm. But it also had graduate marks up and over and out. Now, that you could look through and sight through that or through the telescopic sight. You had a gyro stabilizer, and actually could make the gun stay level even though the tank was doing a dipping. Now, of course, it went with the tank, mm-hmm. but it stayed level. And you had what they called a gyro stabilizer on it. And also the graduates in the glass they tell me it was made by spider webs, I don't know, but they would be illuminated. You can't illuminate them, especially at night, and see the yard markers on it. So you have an idea. If you fire and it's short, you can adjust accordingly. And so that's basic, and they're all pure white on the inside, which people don't seem to understand.
I was surprised to hear that. I
was at Katingdi one time with a bunch of people standing around that particular tank, and they were surprised too. That, what do you mean it's white? I said, well, that's one thing in the Army that was white. If you think about it, when you're all closed up and only can look out like this, you want as much light as you can have.
So what was your specific job on that tank, or on your tank?
I was a gunner for about half the time, and then after that I drove from then on to the end of the war.
But you told me that you had really good eyesight, so you were able to really spot things. Can you tell me that story? You spotted something one time that somebody else didn't see.
I'm trying to remember that one. There was times when they were German half-tracks or other vehicles of sorts, as long as we would fire at those. If there was a Tiger tank, which we'd seen not too many, but a few, because remember, we don't try to engage in a super war ourselves. That's not our position to do. Ours is to reconnoiter, find out, see what's happened, probe, do things like that nature. And if it really gets hot, they'll usually withdraw us, if possible. Not always. This couldn't happen all the time because we were stuck someplace and couldn't get out of it. But our job was to find out where the enemy was and what to do about it.
Can you compare it to a Tiger tank, what you were in? Was it Tiger tank more formidable, or where?
We were a toy compared to a Tiger.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was a monster. And our shells would just bounce off of them.
What would be comparable to a Tiger tank?
That we have?
Yeah.
Oh, now the tanks that you see in Arabia and those places, those are definitely high class. Those are first
At the
class.
time, was there anything comparable?
We finally ended up with the Sherman tanks had a 90 millimeter. They finally put some 90 millimeters on those tanks, and then they could penetrate most of German, anything that they threw at us. I'm not sure it would knock out a Tiger, but anything else it would knock out.
Uh-huh.
The only chance we had was to knock their tracks off or hit them from the rear. So we didn't try to engage tank to tank. We did not try to do that, not intentionally.
And how many of your tanks would have been traveling together? I mean, tell me about the order of how that would have been.
We had 15 tanks. We had actually 17. 2 were in headquarters. 15 were in 3 different platoons. Each platoon had 5 tanks. And I'd say 90% of the time, there were only 1 to 5 tanks put with another TD, with B troop or C troop or A trooper, with tank destroyers, or with part of the infantry. We actually were divided up unbelievable. We fought a war almost like lonesome doves. We weren't with the outfit as an outfit too often.
So you wouldn't have had infantry with you?
We'd be assigned, like we'd be assigned to the 80th Infantry, which we worked with a lot, and the 90th and the 95th and the 185th. But if you would read the journals, we don't understand that as a person in GI because they don't tell you everything that's going on. I'll give you an example. The infantry had taken a hill twice, and they were having a hard time hanging on to this particular hill. So 5 of us tanks were called up to reinforce them and to take the hill with the tanks and then let them get in position. Well, it was a brochure about 8 by 11. It was cellophane pouch, if you will. And we had an aerial map. No, not a road map, it was an aerial map, and they're much different than a road map. So we would put this map into this folder, and then we had a grease pencil. And today's assignment was we're in Batavia, and our assignment was come up here to Elgin. And we have 8 hours or whatever to do this in. Well, this particular map we misread. So there was a road this way and this way. This way meant you faced the enemy exactly. I mean, you were right out in no-no land. This way was a back way around this hill. And when I say hill, they're several thousand feet tall. So we misread it, and we ran out, and the lead tank thought he was in trouble, and that happened to be M5. It was the last one in the outfit. He took off. There was an 88 sitting right on the road, headed right at us. 2 Germans hopped into a motorcycle and sidecar, and they actually ran over them. Our tank did, went down in this valley. And meanwhile, there's this Cub, an observation plane, comes up, and he starts circling the dang tank, like, go away, you don't need you. And then my tank hit a landmine, so I bailed out, and we all bailed out. It didn't kill anybody. And we hopped on another tank, and there's guys stuffed into hatches, on top, every place. Well, I was on the driver's side, so I lay there on the fender and was pointing which way he should see. You're pulling these sticks. When you drive a tank, it's just like a bulldozer. And now they have a steering wheel, I understand, but we had sticks. So I would go that way, pulling that stick, or this way, and guide him up over the hill. And as we were going over the hill, they started throwing these screaming memes at us. And they were mortars that sound like a real high shrill of a woman's voice. Oh, they were horrible.
And you called them screaming memes?
Yeah.
And what was the other one? The bouncing Betty and a screaming meme?
Yeah. We had names for everything. And a couple of guys got hit by shrapnel, and we did that. We got into town, and we lost 2 tanks, my tank and another tank. And they congratulated us. We took the hill. Yeah, we did. I mean, you just don't. This is how it was. Yeah. You don't see these stories in paper, but they are funny things. And by 1 o'clock in the morning, we had 2 new tanks.
Really? How did that get resupplied so quickly?
I have not a clue how that happened. I mean, we thought we was going to get a break, and here next morning we had brand new tanks.
The same type, though.
Oh, yeah.
Resupplied with
Well,
the same
the guys that had. Oh, by the way, the fellas, the 4, there were only 4 GIs in the lead tank. They got out of the tank and went down a ravine, and they was waiting until dark, and it started getting hot. They were starting to shell, so they started moving up the hill. And as they were moving up the hill, there were Germans moving down the hill. Now this is getting about dusk. So you have to know this Italian kid. He yelled something at him. He says, something, I don't know what it was. The Germans went that way, and they went back up the hill, and they went down the hill. So they got a brand new tank the next morning. So there was a few guys got hit by shrapnel, but we survived that particular battle.
And recap for me, was that part of the Battle of the Bulge, or was that the Battle of France?
The Battle of the Bulge we were on the outskirts of that. It was snowing. It was horrible weather. You've seen that in the movies. That part of it is very true. It was horrible.
Supposedly one of the coldest winters on record in Europe, in European history or something.
Do you ever sit in a tank when it's cold?
Yeah,
All that steel.
Cold metal.
They were very cold. And we whitehorsed them, and we sort of, you'd say a tank is great, but one thing is on cobblestones and on snow, if you happen to play it wrong when you're traveling, especially if you try to do it too hard on some particular terrain, all those cleats work just like runners and off right off the side. They're great this way. They really are. We pulled many a vehicle out of bad straits, but if it's too slippery, they're not good sideways.
So did you learn how to drive a tank in basic training, or you did?
I learned that in Camp Campbell. Yeah.
So you would have been prepared for that. They wouldn't have put you in that job knowing that you didn't know how to drive.
I heard that they did. I heard that they did in Sherman's, but no, I had experience with driving a tank.
And so that's common. Through basic training, everybody would get that level of training.
You're supposed to, yeah. But when we had the new tanks, we didn't know beans about them. We had no idea what they were about. We had to learn that on the job, so to speak. Yeah.
Were there many casualties in your unit?
My own outfit itself, there's 25 of them buried in Hams, Luxembourg, and it's well over 100. Remember, we weren't that very big an outfit. And I'll tell you one story about, you talk about, well, we didn't have casualties. Before the Battle of the Bulge, we were in an outpost, 5 of us, all by ourselves. There was no one else there. And so we took grenades, strung them up with wires around the house, put this tank next to the house, be camouflage, and took one of the guns off and put it in the house upstairs, because we were there was a road coming to our right and around in front of this house, but there was no one around. And it had a brick outhouse, and we were lucky. We had a GI that had gone to cooking school, so we made him a deal. You fix our meals, we'll do guard duty, because war is mostly guard duty. And we'll do your guard duty if you cook us meals. Okay. So one morning about, I'd say 5 o'clock in the morning, somebody pulled a pin on a grenade. And as it happened, one of the guys was sitting, going to the bathroom there in the John. Luckily it was brick, because he had no idea what to do. Afterwards it was funny, but not at the time. Boom! Off went this grenade. Here comes the sow, and the ring and the wire wrapped around this pig's ear. The pig had set the trap off. We had pig that night for supper.
And bacon for breakfast.
That was fun. And we ate pretty good for a few days. And at the same outpost, they really laid it in on us one night, and it was right at the time of the bulge. I don't know if they had miscalculated where they were at or where we were, But anyway, this barrage happened. Well, one shell exploded outside where I was. I was sleeping like the window here, and the tank was out there, and this explosion, and boom, a piece of shrapnel came in and laid right here, burned a hole in my blanket. Never touched me.
Because you wouldn't have had a flak jacket or anything like that. You had nothing.
And then another time in the same place, we had a lieutenant and three GIs came up in a Jeep, and he had some mission, I don't know what it was. And we says, well, I don't know what your mission is, or I didn't tell him, but the guy he was talking, GI he was talking to, told him don't go past here because we're it. Oh, he was a second lieutenant, and he had something he had to go do. Off him and the three guys went. It wasn't 2-3 minutes later, we heard a rat-a-tat-tat, and they never came back. So that's the kind of outpost it was. And when we were replaced with a company. There were 5 GIs. We were replaced with a company at that spot.
And a company is made up of what? How many would be in a company?
Oh, well, it would be like the whole 43rd.
Okay.
Well,
So 5 GIs got replaced by a company.
It was all infantry that replaced us, but it was a company of infantry, like the whole 80th, which is many hundreds of men. And so that was, then we were going to spend Christmas there, we thought, and that didn't happen because of the Battle of Bulge, and they pulled us out of there, and the outfit headed towards Luxembourg and the Battle of Bulge, but the weather broke and what have you, so we were not really into that particular phase, even though it was about 150 mile in width. The whole Battle of the Bulge was not just one little spot.
Right.
And so that's sort of an episode. There were a lot of close calls. Another one was, I keep telling about these high hills. We had taken a hill, and they actually still had trenches on occasion. We went into trenches for the infantry, and we took the hill, and this same Italian kid gets out of the tank, and he's chasing down through the trenches with a zigzag with a bayonet trying to capture him, you know. And it was funny. I mean, it wasn't, but it was. And we heard this whistle, incoming artillery, right? So I hit the deck, and I saw the dirt splash up, and this shell lay on the ground like that. I mean, it wasn't as far as we are apart. I'm looking at it. I didn't see the shell hit, but I saw the dirt fly, and the shell lay there, didn't explode. And about another 3 foot, another one hit, and the same thing happened. We weren't there on the third one. We got out and moved. But imagine the odds of 2 duds in the same locale. I mean, how close you can get. Another close one was really back just as we crossed. We weren't out of France yet. And some nights could be so black. If we'd walk down the street or do anything, you would look up and see the silhouettes of the buildings, and that's how you could tell where the street was. I mean, it was that black. And on this night, you couldn't even see that. It was horrible. And I just stood out. I had my mess kit, standing there waiting to get my bearings. Couldn't move. Then I see this flash, and there's yellow and bluish flash right side of me, and this explosion. I went flying back in the building. It destroyed the Jeep and window right next to where I was standing. I still didn't get a scratch. I laugh at it, but I just can't understand how I could go through a war and not even draw blood any place. You know, very, very fortunate.
This next section is entitled Life, and it's really asking you questions about your life and service and time at the front. How did you stay in touch with your family during this entire time?
We had what you call email. No, not email. Vmail. Vmail. I guess we would write on this sheet. Then they would take and microfilm it. And then they would send it, because they could get thousands of letters on a piece of film. Then they come back home, and then they would enlarge it And I hadn't seen one. My sister has, and came back, and it's just like a photograph. I'd only seen the one, but it's the only way you had of keeping track.
Did you have time to write a lot?
There were lulls along the SAR right before, I would say, November, December, January. In those areas, it was pretty dormant. We would move up and down the SAR area and the Moselle and places that usually along rivers, and there was action, but not much forward action, because we stayed back and forth in one town 3 or 4 or 5 times. We'd go and come back, whatever the situation was, because there were times when we had to withdraw. I mean, it wasn't always forward. So, especially the pillboxes. We were right in the Siegfried line. I was, as far as I know, the first tank ever to see the Siegfried Dragon's Teeth of the Third Army. And we were that far forward, and we were on a mission all by ourselves to reconnoiter the area, just one tank. And I was driving along there, and off to the side was a German payroll truck. There was 2 dead Germans in it, and I could have been lots of money. I found out later if we had taken that money, we could have eventually used it. So stupid me, you know. But as we went over this rise, there were those dragon teeth, and boy, they didn't look very promising. And so we turned around and reported and what was ahead, and I just sort of have a feeling that was one of the first ones to see the dragon teeth on the ground.
Yeah. So if you had to write on V-mail, did your family have to write on V-mail too, to send you letters?
No.
So how did they write to you a lot?
Yeah, we had it was regular mail. We would have what you call mail call. Somebody would be bringing them sacks of mail up and what have you, and maybe the sergeant in the tank would go to the CP or whatever. It depended on the situation. Mm-hmm. But you see it in the movies, or Paul, Joe, Pete, well, sort of like that.
Mm-hmm. So a simple question, what was the food like? Do you remember eating in the Army? What was that like? K rations? C rations?
At the end of the war, it was terrific. It was all prepared by German prisoners. They had it better as prisoners, and in fact, a lot of them stayed in this country. Basic training wasn't bad. It was food. Overseas, we fixed our own meal. Like I said, we were lucky we had a cook in our tank, but it was mostly K rations and C rations. We'd put holes in a can and set it on the motor and let it heat up and finish opening it and chow it down. That's how we ate. We didn't eat too well, but we had sufficient.
So so you would be out. Would you have just enough rations to get through how many days you needed to be out, and then would you go resupply, or how did you? We
were supplied by, the Red Ball Express. I know you've heard that or seen it in movies.
Yeah.
But, that was true. The Red Ball Express was our savior when it come to ammunition or petrol or water or food. That was all delivered by those trucks and the truck driver. And they had, they would throw off the supply, what do you need? They just toss it. There it is, Charlie. Well, we tried to get mostly the K rations because we liked those because they had everything in them. They had like 3 cigarettes and toilet paper and
gum
or candy, and they would have a meat of some kind and some crackers, and that was a square or oblong box.
Was the food always different in it, or was it the same?
You never knew.
You never knew.
It was catch.
Oh, okay.
They didn't label you. You like this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you become a smoker with your 3 cigarettes?
No,
or did you?
I didn't. I saved them for other things, and I smoked a pipe. I would trade cigarettes for pipe tobacco.
Okay. I've often heard that the troops got entertained a lot. Did you ever see entertainers coming to wherever you were at to keep you entertained?
I saw 2. One was a regular USO with well, not Hollywood style people, but they had talent, you know. I did see Marlene Dietrich. She was the only one of notoriety that I came across. Yeah, we had several times in regular USOs. Wasn't too often you sit there in your old muddy boots and everything, you know, and so forth.
What was your impression of Marlene Dietrich? Was it pretty neat, or?
Well, she reminded me of a German. She had pretty legs, eh?
Yeah, supposedly. Did you ever get time when you were on leave during that, when you were overseas?
No, not really. Mm-mm. We had what they would call, we were supposed to have rest and recreation, and every time it happened, maybe it lasted for 12, 15 hours or something, and we had to go right back and do something else.
So you were on the whole entire time. You were on, and
I was up front.
You were up front. No downtime.
No.
Wow. What did you think of your fellow officers and fellow soldiers?
Well, most of the fellow soldiers are okay, and the officers, most part, were okay. There were a few that I found out that they were. Sometimes we get beer rations someplace and we didn't get them, but the officers got it, and that sort of thing. And those things happened. I found out later. It didn't bother us at the time because we didn't know any better.
Did you make any lasting friendships with these guys?
Not really, because my best buddy got killed, and he was teaching me to play chess. And I was getting into chess pretty well. He was a little older. He was probably 10 years older. And he sort of took me under his wing, I guess. And we got along real well, but he got killed.
He got killed while you were in Germany?
He got killed the same place I told you,
Okay.
the Screaming Mimes.
Oh, okay. Did you keep a personal diary or anything like that?
I did and lost it. I had every city and town, burg, whatever I'd gone through, I'd write down, and I don't know. We moved a lot, and somewhere I lost all that.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
Absolutely.
What day was that?
That was November, let's see, I said that, now I'm tongue in cheek. It was in November 45. I was in Camp Bowie, Texas. And of course I lived in Indiana, so they paid us whatever the rail fare was from Bowie, Texas to Huntington, Indiana. So I decided to fly home, and I got as far as Indianapolis, and we were grounded because of a snowstorm. So then I had to bus it from Indianapolis home. But when I got home, I wasn't in a big hurry because my parents were divorced while I was in the service, so I didn't have any place to go. I literally had no home to go to.
Yeah.
I had to rent a home or rent a place.
Were you married yet?
Oh,
You
no,
hadn't been
I
married yet?
hadn't met her yet.
Yeah. What did you do when you got home? Did you go right back to work? Did you go to school?
I thought of school, but I had a pretty good job at General Electric, and I found out that they were going to go on strike. So what did I do? I worked for now defunct Railway Express Agency. It used to deliver packages like UPS does now, only they worked off the railroad. And my dad worked for them. And so I worked for 6 weeks there, and then when the strike was over at GE, I went back to GE, went to work right away, and started my civilian life. Tried to forget the Army.
Did you ever take advantage of the GI Bill?
No, I didn't. I was going to be a photographer, and it was such low pay I couldn't make ends meet, so I didn't even bother with it. Other than that, I didn't try.
Did you work for GE for your whole career?
Oh, no.
No.
I worked many, many jobs.
Did you join a veterans organization?
Yes, I belonged to the VA and the American Legion.
And the VFW?
Mhm.
So what would you classify as your career after the war? What did you go on to do besides Railway Express?
That was just an interim job, and I was a machinist, and I worked for that for quite a while. And I was a scheduler for U.S. Rubber. I worked for them for 12 years. To make a long story short, eventually I was into plastics most of my life. Bottles or any type of plastic, I've done it. And up until now it's a much bigger field, of course. I eventually ended up here in Batavia, and I ended up as plant manager of a bottle blowing company for American Can.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yes, I have two. I had a son that was in the service, and I also have a daughter that retired from the service, from the Air Force. So it's a little bit in the family.
Was your son in the Army?
Yes, he was in at the Korean or the Vietnam era, but he lucked out and went to Panama, so he didn't have to go over there. He went to Noriega's domain. He didn't care much. That was a rough life down there, and snakes and stuff. He said it was terrible.
Heat, yeah.
And so as far as the career, what I saw my daughter went through, she was married in Germany in the service, and the perks that they used to get, I said, I should have stayed in. There's some pretty good perks here, you know, as long as it's not combat. And then for a long period, it was okay, you know. But now it's a different story again.
And our last question for today, can you tell me what freedom means to you?
Well, I know almost without a doubt every night when I lay my head down. Don't ask me any further.
Thank you very much.